Chengfeng invites an American Feng Shui master named Dan Mai to ask for help in rescuing him from the crisis that is plaguing him and his family. Dan Mai is highly skilled, but unable to break the hypnotic influence Charlie has placed on Wu Qi. Dan Mai admits she is inferior to the dragon hiding in Orus Hill. Nanako's plane lands in Orus Hill, excited to meet Charlie. Wow! Dear viewers, don't forget to subscribe and like. The story will get even more exciting. Thank you.
Chapter 2561. Chengfeng respectfully invited Dan Mai to sit on the sofa. After sitting down, he sighed and said in pain, "Hey, Uncle Mai, you must help me this time." Dan nodded and said seriously, "Since I have come here, I will naturally do my best, so you must tell me everything exactly." Chengfeng replied and sighed, "After all, I am to blame for being confused and making some unreasonable decisions." With that said, Chengfeng told Zhifei and Zhiyu brothers and sisters to go to Japan to be kidnapped, then Ruoli killed the Matsumoto family, and then he betrayed Ruoli and assassinated Liona. It was probably related to Dan. He narrated again. After speaking, he asked with a worried look, "Uncle Mai, do you think I am being retributed?" Dan waved his hand and said seriously, "Chengfeng, you are my worldly nephew, so I won't follow you with that tricky stuff. Remember, in this world, no matter from the perspective of Feng Shui from a scientific point of view, there is no such thing as retribution at all." Chengfeng asked in surprise, "Why? The Taoist law you believe in is not about rebirth and retribution." Dan shook his head and said, "What you are talking about is Buddhism. Moreover, our Feng Shui metaphysics is not in the same line as Taoism. We are the Book of Changes and 8 diagrams, Qimen Dunjia." Chengfeng hurriedly asked, "Then you just said that there is no karma, is this true?" Dan smiled and said, "In my opinion, it's natural, but it doesn't matter if you don't believe it. I will sort out our perspectives in Feng Shui metaphysics for you, just like a discussion." Chengfeng hurriedly said, "Please tell me." Dan paused slightly and said, "I ask you, according to the saying of karma, those who do evil must be punished severely, and those who do good will be rewarded, right?" Chengfeng nodded, "According to it, it is true." Dan asked, "Then I ask you, some babies die right after they are born. They have only just begun in this life. There is no evil and no good. Why don't they even have a chance for healthy growth?" Chengfeng looked embarrassed. I can't say." Dan nodded and asked, "Then I will ask you again, why do some people have ill-fated destinies all their lives?" With that, Dan sighed in a melancholy manner and said slowly, "When I was young, it happened during the Central Plains War. Father moved the family from Central Plains to Eastcliff to escape the war. At that time, my family lived in Maur, and there was a woman next door who ate and recite Buddha every day, remembering the way of doing good. Her husband died young, and she took pains to pull the 3 sons to grow up and let them start a family, but when she was old, none of the 3 sons provided for the elderly. The 3 daughters-in-laws were fighting for the family property, beating and scolding in turn, and even every time they came, they deliberately snatched her little rations, and even the water tank had to be smashed before they were satisfied, just hoping that she would die sooner, so as to occupy that old house. Although the 3 sons didn't want to do anything to her, they are always ridiculing when they come over. Even when someone next door is in a funeral, they point to her nose and curse at her why she can't be the same as the neighbor's old man, get acquainted and die soon. Not only did the old woman not have enough to eat or dress warmly, but she also washed her face with tears all day long. Although she didn't cry and blind her eyes, her eyesight also deteriorated. In addition, she couldn't light the lamp oil. Every time the sun went down, she would not reach out her fingers. Life was suffering. But she didn't expect any son's conscience to discover, and eventually froze to death on that extremely cold winter day in Eastcliff. On the day of the funeral, the cry of the 3 sons could be heard through the 3 alleys, but everyone could see that it was just a scene for outsiders. After the play, they happily sold it. The ancestral house where the mother lived, after the money was divided, was used as a bird and beast scattered. You said, if there is really karma, why was this old woman doing good and accumulating virtue all her life, but she suffered all the suffering in her life? Chengfeng thought for a while and said seriously, perhaps it is a debt owed in the previous life. Will you pay the debt in this life? Dan sneered and said disdainfully, Only people who can't understand the law of events will use such rhetoric to impose an explanation. If everyone believes in the previous life or the next life, then you might as well borrow all of your money. Give it to me, I will pay you twice in my next life, do you agree? This. Although Chengfeng knew that Dan was just joking and giving an example, he began to agree with Dan's statement in his heart. At this time, Dan continued, similarly, some people are full of evil, but what is the result? Not only can they start and end well, but also the descendants can be shaded. It's like the old woman I just said. After her tragic death, her 3 sons turned out to be very lucky. One was successful in business, one became a warlord, and the other went to Nanyang to work hard. Well-known entrepreneurs, good people have not enjoyed a day of blessing, but bad people have blessed their own generations. Do you think this karma is the opposite? Chengfeng was speechless for a while. Zin on the side couldn't help asking, Grandpa Mai, if karma does not exist at all as you said, then this family has these 2 extremes. What is the reason? Dan smiled slightly. Zin, you are asking about the idea, why? If you don't understand the rules, you will only curse with your head up. God is not long-sighted, and add the sentence, good people don't live long. The scourge remains for 1,000 years, but have you ever thought about it? If there really is causal reincarnation, this sentence is impossible at all, because causal reincarnation will not make good people not live for a long time, nor will it cause harm to the millennium. This itself is a contradiction, paradox. As he said, Dan turned around and said, but if you can understand this law, you will know that, in fact, all of this has nothing to do with karma, but from the different life patterns of the family. Chengfeng hurriedly said, Uncle Mai, what is the explanation for fate? Dan explained, fate is numerology, the principle of life, or the law of life. My father once said that the old woman was originally the fate of the lone star of the evil gods. Although she does good all day long, no matter how good she does, it will be difficult to change her fate. To use the simplest analogy, no matter how many carrots you eat, you cannot become a rabbit, because these are 2 completely different sets of logic. You can't be self-righteous and think that rabbits like to eat carrots, and if you eat more carrots, you should become a rabbit. Chengfeng and Zin both nodded thoughtfully. Dan continued, the lone star of Tiansha not only kills husband, wife, but also the children and grandchildren. The worst thing is that she not only defeats others but also cannot escape the loneliness of her 6 relatives and the lonely end of her old age. There is a lifetime of suffering, and a lifetime of sin. Although her 3 sons are extremely unfilial, in terms of fate, their own career prospects are invisibly suppressed by the fate of the old woman. Because the old woman died early, the 3 of them won't die because of this, and only then has the opportunity to soar into the sky later. If the 3 of them are filial sons, and take their mothers, in turn, to take turns to do their filial piety, then it is possible that these 3 sons will die prematurely due to various reasons, maybe they will all die in front of the old woman in the end. This, although it sounds absurd and incredible, this is the real fate. The words of Dan made Chengfeng and Zin stunned. In fact, they didn't have much faith. Mr. Su doesn't believe in gods, immortals, karma, or Feng Shui. There is only one he believes in, and that is strength. However, the Su family has frequently encountered various troubles recently, which made him feel that it might be retribution. But listening to Dan's analysis, it seems that it has nothing to do with retribution. Therefore, Chengfeng couldn't help asking, Uncle Mai, I want to ask more specifically, what on earth is the Su family's recent encounters with various problems? Dan did not speak but beckoned to his great-grandson, Mike. Mike immediately walked forward and handed a compass to Dan, and handed several dice made of animal bone joints and a few old mottled copper coins to Dan. Dan stood up and paced back and forth in the living room. Chengfeng and Zin hurriedly followed by their side, watching his every move nervously, but did not dare to interrupt them. Dan looked for a moment, pointed to the bogu shelf used to partition the space on the side of the hall, and said, Mike, remove this shelf. Mike immediately stepped forward and reached out and moved the bogu frame made of solid wood to the side. Dan placed the compass on the ground where the bogu shelf was originally located and then readjusted the compass's direction according to the scale and position on the compass. Afterward, he opened his mouth and said, Chengfeng, tell me about your birth date. Chengfeng said awkwardly, I don't know. Then say the year, month, day, and the approximate time of birth. Chengfeng recalled for a moment and reported his birth date to Dan. Dan pinched his fingers for a moment and said lightly, "From the perspective of the birth date, your life is generally relatively smooth, but the birth date alone is not exhaustive. After all, there are so many people in the world, and people with the same birth date there are many people, this can only guess a general direction." Chengfeng hurriedly asked, "Uncle Mai, how can I be more detailed?" Dan said seriously, "I just said that in the Yijing gossip, everything in the world follows a set of invisible and intangible rules. There are many factors that affect this rule. 1. In addition, there are your own bones, the Feng Shui of your Su family, good house and evil house, and even the 8 characters of your spouse and children." Chengfeng asked puzzledly, "I think many Feng Shui masters just use a compass to calculate. Why is it so troublesome to come to you?" Dan was not angry, and said lightly, "Most people's fate and fate are constantly changing. That's why some people are too hard to eat in the first half of their lives, but in the second half of their lives, there is a clap of thunder and sudden riches. This is because his fate has changed. It may be that he married a wife of Vanves, and it may be that he gave birth to a son whose birthday character can bring him great fortune. These are unpredictable by ordinary people. It's like real estate. You develop a residential area in a certain area of a city. The market price of this building is 50,000, but if suddenly one day, the subway is open, the price may rise to 6. Suddenly one day, a well-known school set up a campus nearby, and the price may rise to 70,000. If other huge favorable policies can be met, the housing price can even break through 100,000 and higher all the way, and put it on people. The subway may correspond to a good wife, and a well-known school may correspond to a good son. This is a good direction." Chengfeng hurriedly asked, "What about the bad direction?" Dan said, "Bad directions are more possibilities. Similarly, taking real estate as an example, you may also repeat the mistakes of many so-called ghost towns. Originally, you thought that the city was very developed and you tried to build a lot of real estates, but then, it is possible that local resources will begin to dry up, the local economy will be frustrated, and house prices will fall. It may also be that local resources are affected by the market and their prices continuously decline. This has caused companies to go bankrupt and house prices fall. It may even be due to the emergence of other competitors that the entire city's industries have suffered a blow." After speaking, Dan said again, "You should have heard the story of Detroit. It was originally the largest automobile city in the United States. It was extremely brilliant, but in the end, it was so depressed that a large number of people fled. The local real estate even shrank by more than 90%. Who defeated this city? It was Toyota and Honda of Japan, Mercedes, and BMW of Germany. These are all factors that may change the pattern." Chengfeng suddenly realized, and hurriedly asked, "Uncle Mai, just tell me what information you need, I must know everything." Dan nodded, and said calmly, "I want your wife's birthday 8 characters, and abiding birthday 8 characters." Chengfeng hurriedly agreed and immediately reported the specific date of birth. Dan listened and counted. The more he listened, the more puzzled he became. After hesitating for a moment, he opened his mouth and said, "Your wife and Zin are dead. It can be said that from this point, they are very prosperous for you, and they are the kind of prosper who burns themselves and adds firewood to you." After that, he said again, "Furthermore, your 5 elements are very prosperous, and the 4 heavenly stems are all prosperous. Combining your wife and children, from the perspective of life, you are either rich or noble in this life, and even rich and noble. It stands to reason that your fate, let alone 1 in 1,000, is hard to find 1 in 1,000,000 or 10,000,000, it is almost impeccable. According to the development of your fate, your life will be smooth. Water, reaching the peak, shouldn't have this ordeal." "Really?" Chengfeng asked excitedly, "Uncle Mai, then what is going on with me now?" Dan shook his head, and said, "Don't worry." After finishing speaking, he grabbed a handful of bone dice and threw it on the ground casually, and threw down a few copper coins. Immediately afterwards, he kept observing the bone dice, as well as the position and orientation of the copper coins, and the whole population was muttering words, not knowing what was being said. Chengfeng became more and more nervous, staring at Dan intently, not even daring to blink his eyes. A minute later, Dan suddenly grabbed one of the copper coins on the ground, fixed his eyes on him, and murmured, No, if this hexagram shows it, this Tianju Tongbao is not, it should be heading up. As he said, he threw the coin high again. Copper coins worth 4 or 5 million fell on the ground with a crisp ding sound. Then, it rotated several times and finally stopped. However, this time, this Tianju Tongbao still had its head up. He was a little nervous, grabbed the coin and threw it again. But who could have imagined that the copper coin had gone for several laps, and after it finally stopped, it would still face up. This time, Dan's cold sweat has flowed down. Seeing this, Chengfeng on the side was also hung tightly in his heart, and couldn't help but ask carefully, "My uncle, how on earth did this coin come back? What? I missed it 3 times in a row, and the words are all up, too evil, right?" Dan's forehead is already covered with sweat. He stretched out his hand, wiped a cold sweat with his cuff, and murmured, "This Tianju Tongbao, in my gossip, represents the dry sky, and dry for the sky, it should have been written upside down. But now I toss it 3 times in a row, and it's all heads up, which means that this hexagram will change someday. The sky has changed." Chengfeng murmured in his heart, and said to himself, "Although I don't know what the hell is the sky change, I can clearly feel that this is definitely not a good thing." So he hurriedly asked, "Uncle Mai, what does the sky change mean?" Dan stared at the bone dice and copper coins all over the floor, and said dumbfounded, "From the perspective of the hexagram, it is the dragon who came to the world." Dragon came to the world. Chengfeng's expression was horrified, but at the same time, he had some doubts. He murmured in his heart, "What kind of dragon came to this world? This word doesn't feel reliable." However, he soon thought that Dan might toss the coin several times just now, and in the end, it was all heads up. It couldn't be a coincidence, right? So he felt something was wrong again in his heart. So, he tentatively asked Dan, "Uncle Mai, what is the birth of a dragon? Why do you sound so mysterious?" Dan was shivering a bit, and he said falteringly, "If you look at this hexagram, the birth of the dragon means that in your fate, there is a great figure with the fate of the dragon." Chengfeng frowned. "Then is this big man an enemy or a friend to me?" Dan said seriously, "At present, the possibility of being an enemy is far greater than a friend." "How is it possible?" Chengfeng blurted out, "But I haven't provoked any powerful people recently. Why is there such an enemy suddenly?" Dan shook his head and said, "I can see this anymore. Maybe it's because I am not good enough, or my power is not enough. I can see through the rest." After speaking, Dan said again, "But from the perspective of this hexagram, it is really bad for you. It is very likely that all the problems you have encountered recently originated from this." Chengfeng still didn't quite believe it. He pointed to the copper coin in Dan's hand and asked, "Does it mean that the so-called dragon came into the world as long as the coin is upright?" "Correct." Chengfeng asked again, "Can the hexagram go wrong?" Dan said earnestly, "This is the case with the hexagram image, and it can be wrong." Chengfeng didn't give up, and said, "Uncle Mai, can I trouble you to toss the coin a few more times? If the word is down, does it mean that the trouble has gone away or disappeared?" Dan sighed and said, "I toss it a few times, and the result is the same." After speaking, he grabbed the Tianju Tongbao and threw it upward again. Everyone stared at the coin, but the coin still had its head up. Chengfeng gritted his teeth, "Thank you Uncle Mai for trying again." Dan did not speak, picked up the copper coin and threw it out again. This time, the result is still head up. Dan sighed, "Chengfeng, this is fate, and the hexagram is a form of expression of fate. It just displays your fate truthfully. If you want to change the fate, you must solve the problem fundamentally, absolutely not. It can be solved by tossing more copper coins." Chengfeng was already sweating coldly. He couldn't help muttering, "It's cooking wicked. This is obviously a 50-50 probability. How can it be all heads up 5 times in a row?" As he said, a fierceness flashed in his eyes, rushed to grab the Tianju Tongbao, and then threw it forward. This time, the copper coin was spinning on the ground for a long time. When it finally stopped, Chengfeng said excitedly, "The word is head down. This time it is the word head down." Dan shook his head helplessly and said, "I started the hexagram. Only what I throw is counted. You throw it is meaningless." With that said, he picked up the copper coin again and threw it away. The copper coin is still heading up. Chengfeng felt a little hairy in his heart. He looked at Dan and asked, Uncle Mai, how much influence will this so-called dragon's coming into the world have on me? This, I am not good. Dan said truthfully, the other party's fate is too strong, I can see through. With a somewhat unconvincing attitude, Chengfeng asked, is this man better than me? Dan nodded and solemnly said, this kind of fate is the most powerful. It is described as strong and invincible in 2 words. It is absolutely impossible for anyone to beat him in fate. While Chengfeng was horrified, he couldn't help but mutter in his heart, I have always suspected that Zhiyu and Liona are likely to be still alive, and it is very likely that they were saved by the mysterious expert in Japan. Now, what is the old man saying? The dragon came into the world, could it be that he was talking about? Thinking of this, Chengfeng felt a panic in his heart. If all this was as he had guessed, then this mysterious expert would definitely become himself, and even the enemy of the Su family. In a panic, he suddenly thought of Ragnar, and hurriedly asked the butler Anson, where is Ragnar Wu? Is he here? Anson hurriedly said, Master, Ragnar has come. I have arranged for him to rest in the living room and wait for your instructions. Chengfeng blurted out, quick. Call Ragnar over. Anson hurriedly said, okay Lord, I will. After Anson left, Chengfeng said to Dan, Uncle Mai, this Ragnar is the patriarch of a large family in Suzhou. Some time ago, something very strange happened to their family. With that, Chengfeng explained Wu Qi's glorious deeds to Dan. After hearing this, Dan looked terrified and blurted out, is there really such a thing? Yeah, Chengfeng said, I didn't cooking believe it at first, but after watching the video, I believed it. It's so cooking disgusting. Dan frowned and analyzed. According to common sense, even if a person undergoes some changes and is psychologically devastated, his seizures should be random. It is impossible to have such a strict uniform frequency. Yeah, Chengfeng said, that's why I suspect that 80% of the people behind this are ghosts. But Ragnar hasn't found out by himself, so I want Uncle Mai to show him and see if you can find any clues. Can these clues be merged and unified? Dan nodded lightly and said, I will try it. At this time, Anson walked in with Ragnar. Chengfeng immediately greeted Ragnar and said, Mr. Wu, this is the famous Feng Shui master in the United States, Dan Mai. Ragnar respectfully said, hello, Master Mai. Dan nodded slightly at him, and then went straight to the topic. Mr. Wu, has your son's situation improved? Ragnar shook his head and sighed. There is no improvement, it's still the same as before. Dan said, in this way, you can bring him here and let the old man take a look. Ragnar was overjoyed and hurriedly said, Master Mai, wait for a while, and I will inform the family and ask them to send the boy here. Zin hurriedly pulled him aside and said, Mr. Wu, remember to tell your family to let him eat before letting your son go out. Don't let him have an attack in front of Mr. Dan. Ragnar said embarrassingly, okay President Su, don't worry. Having said that, he hurried to the side, took out his mobile phone, and called the housekeeper. 10 minutes later, a helicopter slowly landed in the courtyard of the lakeside villa. Wu Qi, who had just finished eating, was helped by his brother Roger and walked off the helicopter. Anson handed Wu Qi a mask and a bottle of mouthwash, and instructed, chew this bottle of mouthwash, don't leave anyone, then put on the mask and go in. Knowing that the other party disliked him, Wu Qi was depressed and did not dare to delay any time. He hurriedly opened the bottle and poured the whole bottle into his mouth. After gurgling hard for a long time, until the cheeks hurt, Anson greeted, hurry up and put on the mask and follow me in. Wu Qi could only put on a mask obediently and walked into the villa with his brother Roger. Since the incident, Wu Qi has not been out of the house or seen outsiders for a long time. Originally, he had always been very reluctant to go out, wishing not to step out of the house for the rest of his life, but when he heard that there are experts today who might be able to heal his unspeakable concealment, hope suddenly rekindled in his heart. After entering the villa, Anson took the two brothers to the living room by the way. Ragnar hurriedly introduced to everyone, Master Su, Master Mai, this is my youngest son Wu Qi, next to my elder son Roger Wu. Both the Chengfeng and his son looked at Wu Qi with interest. Because Wu Qi is indeed as famous as his name, he is a strange person, because he was popular on the short video platform at the beginning, and his popularity is no less than that of any star. Wu Qi was stared at by the Chengfeng and his son, feeling uncomfortable all over his body and lowered his head unconsciously. Ragnar hurriedly said to Dan Mai at this time, "Master Mai, please show my little son to see what is going on with him." Dan walked in front of Wu Qi, stretched out his hand on his forehead and the back of his head, carefully touched for a moment, then grabbed the coins, muttered something in his mouth, whispered a few words, and then the copper coins were dropped on the ground, staring at the location of each coin intently. After a while, he spoke, "Mr. Wu, this boy's problem should not be his own." Chengfeng on the side hurriedly asked, "The problem is not with himself, that is to say, is it coming from others?" "Yes." Dan nodded and said seriously, "I suspect that boy should have been hypnotized or suggested subconsciously." Ragnar was not surprised at this conclusion, because he knew that the reason why his son became like this was because of Charlie. Even the 8 great heavenly kings are not Charlie's opponents at all, let alone his own little son who has no power to restrain the chicken. So he hurriedly asked, "Master Mai, since you can see the root of my child's problem, I wonder if there is a way to cure him." Dan thought for a while and said, "It just so happens that I have some research on hypnotic suggestion. I can give the boy a try, but I can't give you a package if he can be cured or not." Ragnar hurriedly said, "This is natural. As long as you are willing to try, I will be grateful for it." After speaking, he saw Wu Qi standing there without saying a word, and hurriedly scolded, "Hurry up, thank you, Master Mai." Wu Qi hurriedly bowed again and said nervously, "Thank you. Thank you, Master Mai." Dan nodded slightly, took a red string from his pocket, took another ancient coin, and threaded it with the red string. Immediately afterwards, he merged the inner strength in his body into his fingertips and slammed Wu Qi's forehead. This force was relatively strong, so Wu Qi suddenly felt a little dizzy. Afterwards, Dan placed the tied ancient coin in front of Wu Qi, swaying slowly, and said, looking at this coin, "From now on, what do I ask and what do you answer? Absolutely can't lie to me, do you know?" Wu Qi nodded repeatedly, "I see." Dan asked him again, "Then tell me now, what kind of hypnosis and hints did the other party give you?" Wu Qi vaguely said, He told me every hour, must eat once." Before the last word came out, Dan immediately said, "Okay, you don't need to say the last word." After speaking, he said again, "Wu Qi, from now on, no matter what others have asked you to do, what kind of hints they have given you, you have to completely forget it, do you understand?" Wu Qi nodded ignorantly and stammered, I understand." Dan gave a hum, and asked in a deep voice, "Then do you still remember what hint the other party gave you?" Wu Qi nodded blankly and said, "Remember, he asked me every hour." Dan hurriedly blurted out, "Stop talking. You will pay close attention to the copper coins in my hand. From now on, forget all the orders others gave you. Do you understand?" Wu Qi continued to nod. "I understand." Dan wiped his sweat, and asked with some uncertainty, "Then do you still remember any hints that the other party gave you?" Wu Qi said without hesitation, "Remember, he let me." Dan's expression was very ugly, and he scolded loudly, You, hurry up." Wu Qi was taken aback, and immediately awoke from the hypnotic state, and immediately closed his mouth. Ragnar asked nervously in the clouds and mist he was watching, "Master Mai, what is going on?" Dan shook his head, and said with horror, "The man who gave your son hypnotic hints seems to be far more capable than me. The hypnotic hints he gave, I can't erase it at all, and I can't even shake it." "What?" Ragnar was speechless in shock. He couldn't believe that a 90-year-old master of Feng Shui and metaphysics would have nothing to do with Charlie's tricks. What's even harder to believe is that Dan would take the initiative to admit that Charlie's ability is far greater than him. Chengfeng on the side was even more shocked. He blurted out, "Uncle Mai, what did you mean? Looking at the whole country, there is absolutely no possibility that any metaphysical master can be compared to you." Dan's face is somewhat unbearable. Just now, he was envied and hated by the divine dragon in the hexagram. He did not expect that there is another mysterious master who is better than himself in professional skills. It made him feel more shocked. So he said angrily, This can only be said that there is a sky outside the sky, and there are people outside the world. Chengfeng was shocked. Originally, he inferred that in Orus Hill, there must be a very powerful master against him. Now Dan also said that what made Wu Qi look like a ghost was a person who was stronger than him in Feng Shui metaphysics, and Wu Qi happened to be in Orus Hill again, which means that Feng Shui metaphysics master is also in Orus Hill. If the two are the same person, wouldn't it be more difficult for him? So he hurriedly asked Ragnar, "Mr. Wu, who did your son offend when he was in Orus Hill?" This. Although Ragnar knew that Charlie was the one who had offended his son at the beginning, now he dare not say 10,000. After much deliberation, he could only hesitate to explain. "Mr. Su, to tell you, my son looks harmless to humans and animals, but it's not a good thing. Fsyuking, I sent him to school. He was fine. After he went to school, the good ones didn't learn bad ones. He just wanted to do some pua on the female classmates, so that several girls suffered a lot of harm because of him. So I have always suspected that he ended up like this because he offended a certain big person, or made a big person displeased." Chengfeng hurriedly asked, "Could that master hide in the university in Orus Hill?" Ragnar said awkwardly, "This. I don't know." Dan paced back and forth on the spot, muttering in a low voice, "Orus Hill. Orus Hill. I really can't figure out how could Orus Hill, S3 square meter land have such strength. A strong person. Is this place outstanding, or is there any treasure?" The great-grandson Mike of Dan, who has never spoken much, said at this moment, "Grandpa, don't you always hope that you will have another breakthrough in your lifetime? I think this is definitely a great opportunity." Mike's words let Dan's whole person cheer. He has studied Yijing-Bagua and Feng Shui metaphysics all his life, and it seems that he has reached the pinnacle. In fact, he has just passed the entry level in Feng Shui metaphysics. True metaphysics is far more than Feng Shui and gossip, but a large school of wisdom and inheritance of Chinese ancestors. Among them, many advanced metaphysics have been lost, and almost no one knows. In this life, Dan has been quite accomplished in Feng Shui, but he has been crushed by several other masters. Among them, Lai Qinghawa, who is 10 years older than him, is the most cruel. Lai Qinghawa can be regarded as the most accomplished in the field of Feng Shui metaphysics among all Chinese Americans. There are still 2 high-level masters, but they are no longer alive. Dan has been hoping that after Lai Qinghawa enters the soil, he will become a leader in Feng Shui metaphysics. However, seeing that he was in his 90s, Lai Qinghawa, who was over 100 years old, was not dead yet. A few years ago, Qinghawa left the United States and returned to China for 3 years. And those 3 years were the 3 years in which Dan had the strongest sense of accomplishment. Because no one could find Lai Qinghawa, he temporarily became the strongest in the field of geomancy and metaphysics in the United States. He once felt that the reason why Lai Qinghawa wanted to leave the United States and return to China was probably that he had reached the end of his life, so he wanted to return to his roots, return to China to spend the last time in his life, and would not live back to the United States. What he did not expect was that Lai Qinghawa returned to the United States some time ago. What made him even more unexpected and unacceptable was that Lai Qinghawa was in excellent condition. Although he was over 100 years old, he looked better than him. For a time, Lai Qinghawa, who was nearly 20 years old, became the focus of discussions in the entire American Chinese circle. Countless people regarded Lai Qinghawa as an old god. For a time, legends about him spread throughout the Chinese community. During that time, Dan was extremely depressed. Although depressed, he was also very curious and yearning for Lai Qinghawa's changes, so he made a special trip to visit him very humbly. During the visit, he tentatively asked why he became young. Lai Qinghawa only said to him in 8 words, "There is a sky outside the sky, and there are people outside the world." Dan also understood the meaning of his words. He knew that Lai Qinghawa was telling himself that he met an expert in China, so he also encountered great luck. Although Dan didn't know what kind of destiny Lai Qinghawa encountered, he speculated that Lai Qinghawa could suddenly be 20 years younger when he was about to die, and he might have mastered a higher level of metaphysics. In addition to the Feng Shui mystery, metaphysics also has the Fu seal formation. The 9-character mantra spoken by the ancestors, Lin, Bing, Fight, J, G, formation, column, forward, and line are the core of the Fu seal formation. However, these are not the true top techniques of metaphysics. Because, in the field of metaphysics today, there has always been an unproven legend, that is aura. In ancient literature records, aura is often mentioned, as well as the chain repair method based on aura. There are even relevant records in many folklore and famous stories. It is said that aura is the highest among all powers, and if you master aura, you can master everything. However, since modern times, the metaphysical circle has not found any cultivation method that can harness spiritual energy. Countless people in the metaphysical circle searched desperately, but did not find any practical clues. Although Dan was also full of longing, but he was also very clear in his heart that he certainly did not have such good luck. However, the words of great-grandson Mike reminded him. Orus Hill, maybe it's his own opportunity. Thinking of this, he immediately said to Chengfeng, Chengfeng, your second son, eldest daughter-in-law, and eldest granddaughter all disappeared in Orus Hill, and Mr. Wu's son was hypnotized by masters in Orus Hill. In my opinion, this Orus Hill must have a hidden dragon and crouching tiger. If this is the case, I will personally go to Orus Hill to see if I can find a clue. Chengfeng suddenly became excited when he heard this. What he worries about most now is that he doesn't know the situation in Orus Hill at all. Since Dan was willing to go, he certainly couldn't ask for it. So, he said excitedly, Uncle Mai, you are willing to go to Orus Hill, it would be better there. If I need to prepare in advance, please speak. Dan waved his hand, you don't have to prepare anything specifically for us. The more you prepare, the more likely it is that someone will discover the connection between us. Chengfeng hurriedly said, Uncle Mai, then I will help you arrange food, clothing, housing and transportation to Orus Hill in advance. You don't have to. Dan refused, you don't need to prepare anything. Tomorrow morning, Mike and I will take a train to Orus Hill together. When we get there, we will find a hotel again. Seeing Dan's resolute attitude, Chengfeng no longer insisted, and said, then everything will be Uncle Mai's. An hour later, a Gulfstream G650 private jet landed at Orus Hill Airport. Ito Nanako was so excited, her heart was already surging when she thought that she had finally come to the city where Charlie lived. After passing the customs inspection, the group came to the exit of the corporate jet building. A convoy of luxury cars has been waiting here for a long time. Warnia saw Ito Nanako pushing Ito Takehiko out of the wheelchair, and immediately smiled and waved at her, Nanako. When Ito Nanako saw her, she was naturally very happy, and quickly responded, Sister Warnia, why are you here to pick us up yourself? Warnia smiled and said, you and Uncle came all the way. As the host, I didn't come to meet you personally. Wouldn't it be a bad etiquette? With that, she hurriedly bowed slightly to Ito Takehiko, and said politely, Uncle Ito, welcome to Orus Hill. Takehiko folded his hands together, squinted slightly, and said with a smile, thank you, Miss Song, you made a special trip to pick us up. Warnia hurriedly said, Uncle Ito, you are welcome. This time, you have to stay in Orus Hill for a few more days. Then I will accompany you and Nanako around. While talking, Warnia said again, Nanako, Uncle Ito, the team is ready, let's go to my house to take a rest, the rooms are ready, I specially prepared a dinner party for you to start with. Ito Takehiko hurriedly said, Miss Song, I have already booked a hotel. Emi, Tanaka, and I are staying in the hotel together, so I won't come to bother you. Warnia hurriedly said, Uncle Ito, you have arrived in Orus Hill. As the host, how can I let you stay in a hotel? The rooms at home are ready, and there are enough rooms, so you can live in peace. Ito Takehiko smiled and said, Miss Song, we are not the last resort. We don't want to cause trouble to anyone. Nanako is a good friend to you. She lives in your house. I naturally don't have any opinions. People don't come to disturb your house, otherwise, if a dozen people disturb your home, I really feel sorry for it. Although the Japanese are very polite and polite on the surface, they are actually a little cold in their bones. This indifference is actually not a weak human trait, but they don't like to cause trouble to others. If they can do things by themselves, try their best to do it themselves. Not to trouble others is a last resort, this is basically the norm in Japanese social life. Therefore, Ito Takehiko prefers to stay in a hotel, being free, without restraining himself, and without causing trouble to others. Warnia wanted to persuade him again, and Nanako Ito hurriedly said, Sister Warnia, you don't have to persuade my dad. He has a stubborn temper. You can't convince him. Seeing this, Warnia stopped insisting. At this moment, Emi Ito stepped forward, took the wheelchair from Ito Nanako, and said to her, Nanako, give me the handle. You can talk to Miss Song. Nanako Ito nodded repeatedly and smiled, then please, Aunt Sama. After finishing speaking, she hurriedly took Warnia's arm and ran far away, throwing everyone away 20 or 30 meters. Then she asked with excitement, has Sister Warnia seen Charlie recently? How is he? Charlie. Warnia heard Nanako's question, and then saw her big eyes full of expectation. She couldn't help feeling a little bit. It seems that this little girl's feelings for Charlie are really deep in her bones, but she is living in Japan most of the time. I really don't know what she should do in the future. Immediately afterwards, she thought of herself again, and could not help but secretly laughed at herself. I patronized her with emotion, so why am I not the same? Although Charlie and I live in the same city, he has married after all. I usually think it is not so easy to meet him. Thinking of this, she really sighed and said to Nanako, I haven't really seen Charlie these days. The last time I saw him was the time I went to Aoshui's house for dinner. Nanako nodded in disappointment, and sighed, well, I don't know if I will have the opportunity to see him more this time. Warnia asked in surprise, did you not tell him this time? Nanako shook her head, I haven't told him yet. Warnia hurriedly said, why don't you tell him in advance? Would you like me to call him now and invite him to dinner at home in the evening? Nanako said with some embarrassment, I actually want to give Charlie a surprise. After that, she looked at Warnia and asked expectantly, Sister Warnia, can I trouble you with something? Warnia smiled slightly and asked her, do you want me to call Charlie and invite him to eat at home without telling him that you have arrived in Orus Hill? Yes. Nanako said with excitement, Sister Warnia, can you help me? In fact, Warnia herself, like Nanako, has been enamored of Charlie for a long time. So, in the final analysis, the two people are actually rivals in love. It's just that Nanako was a few years younger than Warnia, and she was pretty and cute. Now she is looking forward to Warnia and her eyes are shining, which makes Warnia feel affectionate. Seeing her in love, this little cute girl, Warnia really couldn't bear to refuse, so she said helplessly, well, since you want to surprise him so much, then I will trick him into coming home. Great. Nanako was so excited, she said with excitement, thank you Sister Warnia. Thank you so much. Warnia shook her head helplessly. She had to admit that this little Japanese girl was so coquettish that she could not resist herself as a woman. So, she had to take out her phone and called Charlie. At this time, Charlie was busy in the greenhouse vegetable garden at home. The barrels of compost made by Claire years ago are almost decomposed. This organic fertilizer made from leaves, vegetable leaves, and kitchen waste is green and pollution-free and is very suitable for growing flowers and vegetables at home. Originally, Charlie and Claire worked together in the greenhouse at home, but now Claire took over the renovation project of the Embrand Group and was very busy every day, so Charlie took the initiative to take care of all these things. While he was busy fertilizing, his cell phone kept shaking in his pocket. Charlie took out his cell phone. Seeing that it was Warnia's call, he connected and asked, Warnia, do you have anything to do with me? Master Wade. Warnia glanced at Nanako and hurriedly said, I want to ask if you have time to come to my house for a meal tonight. Charlie had already learned from Isaac that Ito Takehiko was going to stay at Shangri-La today, so he speculated that Nanako would definitely go to Warnia's house. At this time Warnia called to invite him to dinner. It is estimated that she is likely to be with Nanako. Chapter 2572. However, Warnia did not expressly say on the phone that Charlie was not good to directly show that he knew the specific situation, so he pretended to be curious and asked, why are you asking me to have dinner? Warnia hurriedly said, that's right. Grandpa said that I haven't had a chance to invite you to sit at home recently, so he wants me to ask you if you have time to come to your house for dinner tonight. Charlie didn't expect that Warnia's remarks turned out to be that Mr. Song wanted to invite him to dinner, and never mentioned Nanako. It was estimated that Nanako wanted to surprise him. Thinking of the beautiful and generous, gentle and quiet Nanako, Charlie inevitably missed her a little, and for a while, the scene of walking with her on a snowy night in Kyoto came to mind. After a moment of contemplation, Charlie said to Warnia, pretending to be confused, since it's the old gentleman's invitation, I can't refuse it. Please tell him, I will pass tonight. Seeing Charlie's promise, Warnia said happily, that's great, do I need to drive over to pick you up? Charlie smiled and said, don't bother, my father-in-law happened to be at home, and I will drive his car over in a while. Okay. Warnia said with joy, then I will wait at home for Master Wade to come. Warnia bid farewell to Charlie, and then ended the call. Nanako, who was already dancing with excitement, hugged Warnia's waist and said happily, Sister Warnia, you are so kind. Warnia smiled and said, don't patronize and thank me. This is the first time I lied to Master Wade since I knew him. When you meet him later, you have to explain to him why I lied to him. Nanako Ito said with a smile, Sister, don't worry, I will definitely explain it. My sister has helped me so much. How can I let my sister carry a scapegoat for me? As she said, Nanako Ito said again, by the way, Sister Warnia, please help me make an appointment with Aoshui. I picked an Akita for her from home and stayed with the accompanying bodyguard. Warnia smiled and said, that's great. You don't know how much she liked the Akita you gave me. As long as I post the little guy's photo to the circle of friends, she will definitely like it and leave a comment. Yes, I will let her know. Nanako hurriedly reminded, then you must tell her to keep Mr. Charlie a secret before she comes. And don't disclose the information about my coming to Orus Hill to him in advance. Warnia nodded, don't worry, I will tell her. At this moment, Charlie saw that it was almost time for dinner. Claire said hello in advance, and did not come back for dinner tonight, so after finishing his work, he returned to the villa. Elaine had already prepared a few dishes at this time, and when Charlie came in, she said hurriedly, oh my son-in-law, are the things in the vegetable garden finished? Charlie nodded, it's over. Elaine hurriedly said, oh, it's really hard work for you. Mom is going to make the meal, so you can wash your hands and eat. Charlie said, by the way, Mom, I have a dinner at night, so I won't eat at home. Ah. Elaine asked a little surprised, why are you going out to eat all of a sudden? Mom has almost prepared this meal, and I have cooked a prairie lamb chop for you. While talking, Jacob walked downstairs and said in a hurry, I'm not at home to eat at night, Charlie has to come with me and eat with people from the Calligraphy and Painting Association.